Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second technical assistance call. These are quarterly calls with all ombudsmen regarding a specific or one topic, and today's topic is volunteer management. These calls are designed to allow lots of time for you guys to talk to each other and ask questions, share, happy things that are happening, frustrations or whatever. So I am Carol Scott. I am the Ombudsman Specialist for the National Ombudsman Resource Center, and glad to have all of you joining us today. A couple of things we want to mention. There's the information about the TA Talks. If you have a topic that you'd like us to consider, email that to ombudscenter@theconsumervoice.org. And on the other side of the slide, just a reminder that if you have logged in to this training, you will be receiving automatically a certificate of participation that you can provide to your supervisor or state ombudsman or whoever collects the continuing education. And this hour-long presentation will count toward the requirements of having training. So, and there's an example of what the certificate will look like. Just some housekeeping. We'd ask that everyone mute themselves when you come in. If you have a question, we'd ask that you raise your hand and we'll call on you and then unmute, and then you can unmute your line. You can only ask questions via audio or chat on Zoom. So feel free to, if you have a question you want to put in chat, we'll try to be monitoring those. If you are watching us on Facebook live stream, you will only be able to type those questions or comments in, and Katie Kohler, who's also with the Resource Center, will be monitoring that chat. We're going to try to get to as many things as possible of your topics and questions. And at the end of this time, there will be a link that you can click on to give us feedback on the technical assistance that we're providing today. And if you want right now to type in the chat where you're located, what city, what state, and how long you have managed volunteers, or if you are a volunteer. So we would appreciate that information, just name and state and how long you've managed volunteers. This is our agenda for today. I'm going to have two presenters. Allie-Ann Sipes is the long-term care ombudsman from Davis County in Utah. She's a local ombudsman, and she may think she's done it forever, but she's actually has done it forever. So we're glad to have her with us. Our other speaker is Kelly Miller, who is the supervisor of volunteers. Well, her actual title is the Volunteer Services Supervisor. She's from Wisconsin, which their ombudsman program is centralized. So it is the Wisconsin Board on Aging and Long-Term Care. She has 30 years of experience working in long-term care and in volunteer management. And she's been the Volunteer Services Supervisor for the past 23 years. Oh my gosh, Kelly, that's like a lifetime. She provides leadership guidance and expertise in developing and maintaining a comprehensive volunteer program for the Board on Aging and Long-Term Care. She is a University of Wisconsin-Madison graduate and currently lives near Madison with her husband, Tom, and her kitty, Bree. that how you say that, Bree? Yeah. So maybe Allie-Ann will be able to tell us if she has any pets. So and then we will open it up for conversation, and then I'm going to share some of the resources that we have on the NORC website. So at this point, Allie-Ann, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Carol. Like she said, I'm a local ombudsman. I cover one county in Utah. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've been in the largest county, Salt Lake County, for 6 years, and then I moved north to the third largest county 2 years ago. So I do have pets. I'm the proud fur mama of 2 hellhound puppies, black labs, that are my entire world. So I do love them. And today, right now, we got snow here in Utah for the first time this season. It's about 27 degrees right now. So I'm really jealous of all the 73 degrees that I'm seeing in the chat. Just to kind of describe how the Ombudsman program is organized in Utah, we are a decentralized program. We have 12 local programs that are connected to AAAs that cover our 29 counties. You can see some other statistics on the screen here. We have 1 state ombudsman and 27 staff ombudsmen that equal 9 FTEs. And my county and Salt Lake County are the only counties that currently have volunteers. And total, there's 8 volunteers. So I have the majority of the volunteers. And I'm really glad that Kelly is going to be presenting with me today, because we're in very different stages of volunteer management. I'm very new to this, and I'm building my volunteer program from the ground up. Kelly has a ton of experience and probably a lot larger program than mine. So you guys will be able to see both sides of it. Next slide, please. So Carol wanted me to discuss some recent highlights of my volunteer program. The best one that I could think of was, of my 7 volunteers, I recruited 5 during the pandemic. I used to have 8, so I had 3 before the pandemic. I recruited 5, and then I lost 1 to go on to grad school. So, all right, we'll give her a pass. The way that I built my volunteer program, I really focus on creating individualized volunteer opportunities. I've been a volunteer in the past. I volunteered at a hospital while I was in college, and it was a great experience, but it was kind of like, here's our box. If you can fit your life into this box, we would love to have you. If not, thank you, but have a nice day. I decided I wanted to take a different approach. So I really do let my volunteers drive the bus. Each volunteer has a different experience, because their lives are different. The stage that they're at is different. The amount of time that they can give is different, and what they want to focus on is different. So I really do try to focus on creating those one-on-one situations for the volunteers to say, okay, generally this is what I'm looking for. On average, I'm looking for volunteers to be assigned to 3 or 4 buildings, visit maybe once a month or more, maybe a little less, but nothing's written in stone. So I really do focus on that individualized communication with the volunteers to say, how can I give you the best experience possible? And because of that, the volunteers themselves are helping to and shape my volunteer program. I call them my guinea pigs, because they're building this with me, and it's still a relatively new program. So I'm constantly asking for feedback, or what can we do better to make it more of a good experience for those volunteers. They're helping me, they're providing a valuable service, they're helping us extend the reach of our program, but it needs to be a two-way street. So I look for those ways to make this the most meaningful for them. Next slide. One thing that I live on is VolunteerMatch. Most of my volunteers, if not all of them, have come through this VolunteerMatch listing. And it's kind of hard to read, and I apologize about that, but I did include the link on there so you can go on and look it up, and feel free to copy the wording I use. I find that no one outside of the Ombudsman program knows what an ombudsman is. So I was careful I didn't use the word ombudsman in the title. I see a question come in from the chat. No, VolunteerMatch is free. I do not pay for this listing. I just went on there. If you want to check with your AAA, they might, if you have other volunteer opportunities through your AAA, they might already have an account with VolunteerMatch, and then you can just go in and add a separate listing. So you can have multiple listings under one account. When I was in Salt Lake County, I managed the volunteer programs for 3 different programs. So I had 3 different listings on here. I have plans. There's other websites, volunteer websites like YouServe, that I want to also get on, but I haven't done that yet. So this is my only one. And to answer the question, no, unlike Kelly, my state, Utah, doesn't have a statewide volunteer program. So it really is pushed to the local level, and most programs, they just don't have time. They don't have the resources to have a dedicated volunteer coordinator. And it's, as most of you probably know, it's really difficult to try to balance being on an ombudsman and managing volunteers at the same time. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for me. When I moved up to Davis, I lost my volunteer coordinator, I can't talk today, volunteer coordinator title. So I did have to start acting as an ombudsman myself, which does make it difficult, but there's still ways to make it work. And this VolunteerMatch is a great place to start. Next slide. And then this was just a quick introduction to me and my program. I really want this to be a dynamic discussion. So I have a question for you guys, something that I currently am struggling with. I have amazing volunteers and they're helping to extend the reach of my program, but I find that I'm bottlenecked because I'm the only one that can enter their activities and cases into our database. They do not have access to that, to do that themselves. So we have all this work done and they're amazing, but then it's a slow process getting it into the database. So my question for the group is, how do you stay on top of data entry when not all staff or volunteers have access to enter their own activities? And what tips and tricks do you have for me to help me try to manage that? So that's all for me. I'm looking forward to our discussion, but I'm going to, next slide, you can see my contact information there. I love talking about volunteers. They are amazing. It's one of my passions. I'm really excited for this opportunity. I was excited to attend this TA talk even before I was asked to present. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'm going to kick it over to Kelly to introduce herself.
Hey, all right, thank you, Allie-Ann. It was great to meet you. I'm glad to be here too. I too can talk nonstop about our amazing volunteer program, so bear with me on that. My presentation is probably a little different because I did learn that word centralized. I didn't know there was a central and a decentral program, so thank you for that, Carol and Allie-Ann. But as Carol introduced me, I'm with the State of Wisconsin Board on Aging and Long-Term Care. been the leader of the Volunteer Ombudsman Program for 23 years and in the state service for 30 plus. So I've been around the block a time or two, but I don't know all the answers. And I have a really great team of staff and volunteers who help me with that on a daily basis. Our program is rock solid, respected, and robust throughout the state of Wisconsin, not all the counties, but throughout the state. That began in 1994 to strengthen the services provided by our regional ombudsman, because the ombudsman can't get everywhere. We too have a handful of people to cover all the long-term care services in the state, and the needs are incredible, as we all know. Our program under the state ombudsman, which is Heather A. Bremer, all staff and volunteers have specific classifications and must strictly adhere to our state code, our federal code of federal regulations, as well as, of course, the Older Americans Act, where a lot of our funding comes from. I am the one supervisor with 5 regional volunteer coordinators covering 32 of the 72 counties. And I want to give a shout out to my team. I think most of them are on today, so thank you. Maybe you'll hear from them. They have some great tidbits to share with you. We average 100 plus volunteers on an annual basis. Whoops. And right now, as of today, I have 94 certified volunteers who go into skilled nursing homes only. So our volunteers are only in the nursing home component of long-term care. Next slide, Carol. Oh, did you have our poster that you wanted to, where did that fit in? This is one of our recruitment tools. Carol slid that in for me graciously. When we talk about recruitment, which I will a little later, we have this one and one of diversity that we post in places with permission. And that little box with the cards, we have a little plastic container that fits business cards. People can take that and they can call our 800 line. So that is one of our recruitment tools. So thank you for sharing that, Carol. Let's go back to the second slide on successful volunteer program. Great. For our program has been very, very successful, obviously for 27 years, but my coordinators are specialists in outreach, education, and recruitment with various medias, and we use everything we can to recruit people. The poster was just one example. We have many, many outreaches, events. We have new exhibit booths. We do a lot of talks, set up in fairs and areas. My staff are very adept at that. And what we've been doing recently is getting on the TV and radio stations. Call your local stations, ask if you can talk about your program, and bring a volunteer, because there's nothing better for people who think they might want to volunteer than to hear an actual volunteer to see what it's like. So that has been super successful for us. My staff are also very thorough on screening. We have a whole screening packet that we use, and everything is standardized. It is a privilege to be a volunteer in our program, and we do have strict standards that we abide by. They also conduct training in compliance with the ACL standards certification. And recently, I'm just really, really proud to share this, that we just this last couple of months added something new called a post-intensive training, which one of my staff worked a year on with 2 other volunteers to develop. And what we do is we bring the people from the new class, just the people from the new class, including a seasoned volunteer, to come together on 3 different occasions just to be together and discuss next steps, boundaries, expectations, and answer questions. And what that does is that also recognizes how appreciative we are of the seasoned volunteer who gets to participate in the class and the post-intensive. And it also helps the new volunteers feel like, yeah, I can do this. Because it's a lot. We ask a lot of our volunteers, and they're the only people in our agency doing what they do, visiting their assigned facility on a weekly basis for 3 hours when we're in person. And we're just getting back again to in person. So it's a really big deal. And I'm very proud of my team for starting this post-intensive training component to fit right in with the ACL standards. The staff are great at supporting, guiding volunteers. Our volunteers, again, have position description. They are the resident-centered advocate. The best thing they can do is empower residents to speak up for themselves as well as family members. They also are the voice for the resident on their permission and request, and they report. They report before they leave the facility to the administration that day, and they report back to the agency. We have a 1-800 line for immediate concerns and a monthly report that they submit to the coordinators. We recognize our volunteers routinely and annually on many, many different levels. One of our biggest recognitions is an award that's given out at the Alzheimer's conference every year. And it is a legacy to our founder, Louise Abrams Yaffe, for the Volunteer Ombudsman Program. And it's a really big deal. We have a beautiful, beautiful engraved plate award that we give out. And they receive that award in front of about 500 to 800 people at the Alzheimer's conference. So they feel like celebrities, which in our opinions, they are. My staff also specialize in communication. They are the liaison between the volunteers and the regional ombudsman. Ombudsmen have a lot on their plate. They cover all residents in long-term care. So with our specialized skills in just the nursing homes, the information that comes from the volunteers, if not on the 800 line, goes through the coordinators, and the coordinators and the ombudsman will discuss next steps. Next slide, please, Carol.
One of the questions came in is, do you do assisted living?
No, not the volunteer program. No, not yet. We'd like to, but we don't have enough people to do that yet.
Okay, thanks.
All right, our best practices on successfully staying connected. All about relationships. Our volunteer coordinators, myself, we build and maintain those relationships. Monthly care calls to the nursing homes that have assigned volunteers, especially during the pandemic. We wanted them to know that we were still here. Just because we couldn't come in, we didn't leave. We have volunteers waiting in the wings. They missed their residents, and they liked having that supportive call as well. They were out there, you know, doing some pretty challenging stuff as well. So they appreciated a friendly voice on the other end, letting them know that we were here and the ombudsman was available for discussion. I can hear music.
Just say, I was trying to scan down to see who that was, but if you aren't speaking, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Last October, we did something really amazing because of the governor's order for the safer at home. We were not allowed to even see each other or go to the facility. So my team collated letters from the volunteers with their picture, voting materials, and resident rights materials for every resident in the facilities of the 32 counties, and mailed those out. Made the call to the provider and let them know that we were sending this because we wanted all of the residents to know that voting is important. They have that right, and their volunteer misses them. So that was a huge undertaking. My staff were not pleased, but once the thing was done, it was a huge kudos and a feather in their cap. So that was really impressive work. They also do routine care calls with their volunteers and potential volunteers. These people were isolated as well, and they needed to feel important and needed and still a place to be, even if they couldn't do what they were supposed to do that they signed up for because of the pandemic. It's not that we don't make calls pre-pandemic. We certainly did that. We maintained relationships, but it was critically important during this time to keep people connected. We did something really, really neat because we had to do virtual and also had to get our volunteers on Zoom and things like that. So we scheduled monthly virtual in-services and things we call coffee clatches with subject matter experts. And we had these high caliber trainings. Some of our guest speakers, they were free. We asked them to do that, which is awesome as well. Coping with grief, understanding funerals during COVID. That was really, I know it sounds sad, but it was really informative. We learned a lot about hospice care. We had someone from Consumer Protection come talk about identity theft and fraud alerts. And just this morning, we had our holiday coffee clatch with the former governor of Wisconsin, Martin J. Schreiber. And he shared his journey with his wife, who has Alzheimer's, about the book he wrote called My Two Elaines, Learning, Coping, and Surviving as an Alzheimer's Caregiver. And it was very heartfelt. So that was just this morning for an hour and a half to wrap up our year. So, you know, open the door, they will come. I know my staff spent a lot of time getting the volunteers set up with Zoom, had to have their family members come in and maybe get that app on their phone or something like that. But we were diligent to get people on. And of course, if they couldn't do Zoom, they could be on virtual to telephone. It's still not the same, but they're still there. The monthly virtual resident council meetings were terrific. It was so great to just be a part of listening to what the residents are doing and let them see our faces and know that we're still here and we're going to come in as soon as we can. And just this month, we resumed in-person resident councils for facilities that did not have a COVID outbreak. Entire state of Wisconsin is still in high community spread, so it's very challenging right now. But we have a really good reentry plan in place. And my staff, one of them who can be with us today, has a volunteer at an in-person resident council. So that's fantastic news. We have an agency newsletter, and I mean agency because it's all of our programs that are housed under the Board on Aging that participate in that. And I have sent it to Amity. Some of them are on our list. And we hear from the volunteer program, the ombudsman program, legal counsel, the state ombudsman, and our Medigap helpline. So there's a lot of really neat information. Plus we highlight volunteers in there, and people like to see their names and their years of service and things like that. So that's encouraging. Also, last December, which I cannot believe it's been a year already, my staff did a really nifty holiday project with the volunteers. It was a holiday recipe book. So what we asked volunteers to send in their favorite holiday recipe and a little story behind it. And it was really fun. I can ask if you would like to have one, just email me individually. I don't know if I want to post it on NORC or not, but there are some fantastic recipes and some really fantastic stories on how they came to be. So that was a lot of fun that we did last year. And we actually printed them and sent them out hard copy because it has a really pretty cover for all the volunteers. Next slide. Okay, so this program does not come without obstacles. Nothing, you know, we love it. We do our best. We have best practices, but there are things that happen. And the challenges for our volunteers, my staff, and our legal counsel to accept volunteers, of course, not passing a background check. You know, it's amazing that we have people apply that have criminal backgrounds. You know, they're going to be going into facilities on their own and listening to and advocating for vulnerable people, and we just can't allow that. So we're pretty strict on who passes that background check. We are also very strict with our COIs, potential and actual conflicts of interest. We have like, I think it's 4 pages long. It is on about a 4-year basis that we do that, but our volunteers and staff know that if a conflict comes up, they need to notify their supervisor. Most of them do notify me and their coordinators about that. For example, if they really love their facility and so their loved one has to have some long-term care or rehab, the first place they're gonna go is the facility that that volunteer is at. So the volunteer knows that they're now a family member to somebody who lives there, and they'll have to take a break because the family member takes precedence over the volunteer component in that facility. They can take a little break or they can get reassigned to a facility that doesn't have a volunteer. So we're pretty strict on the COIs. A huge concern my staff have, we're trying desperately to get through this, is lack of follow through on paperwork. Since people have to send in their BIDs and their applications and their conflict of interest and a couple other forms that we have, they have to do all this before they can become a potential volunteer, much less sit in the class and become trained. So that is sometimes a little headache to keep calling people and try not to bug them, but let them know that we'd like them to be a volunteer, but we have to have this stuff in place. So 2 of my other staff are incredibly doing this, what we call a potential volunteer tracking system. And we're going to implement that in January. She has a grid of formulas where we can punch in time spent, because I want people to know just how long it takes to get a volunteer in place. And so Eliane might be interested in that, because people don't just walk in the door and they're ready to go. It takes sometimes hours and hours of work to get a volunteer ready to rock and roll in that facility. So that's our next solution to lack of follow through and time spent. We also have people that don't want to volunteer during the pandemic, and that's completely understandable. Of course, you know, we aren't going to make anybody do anything they don't want to do ever. We don't make people do things they don't really want to do non-pandemic, but they do have to follow the guides set in place for the agency. And then, you know, this one I just added on at the last minute was staying within boundaries. I kind of talked about that with the family member coming into a facility. That's a boundary that people need to maintain. And I think that boundaries would probably be a whole nother topic of one of these discussions, because there's many boundaries that people can cross over. I've had one of my all-time challenging ones was years and years ago when I was pretty brand new. I had a volunteer who was a retired physical therapist, and she didn't really like how the staff at the facility where she was assigned were doing their PT. She decided to do it for them. The administrator called me and we had a little discussion. And she understood the boundaries on that, but I was very surprised. So, you know, we'll take all of our obstacles and turn them around into, okay, how can we help people learn better, understand better, and get through it together? So, you know, it wasn't as bad as I thought after I had a conversation with her, but it could have been had we not, had the provider not called and said, hey, guess what your volunteer's doing? So that was a huge liability and way out of the scope of boundaries. So I see our people shaking their heads. Yeah, it's out of the scope of an ombudsman boundary. So anyway, those are our obstacles right now that we're overcoming. So if there are any questions, the next slide is just my contact information. I love making contact with people. I think, you know, Allie-Ann and I can stay in contact. I recall a couple months ago having a call with Mickey from Alaska, and we had a really great conversation. So we can have these group ones and we can have them behind the scenes. So I'm available. Just give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Carl, been seeing you wave. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, one of the things I wanted to say, how many individuals became volunteers and then wanted to be ombudsman?
Is that for me or Allie-Ann?
Oh, for Allie-Ann.
Over the years, I've had a couple who have started volunteering with the hopes of getting their foot in the door. One of them is the one remaining volunteer down in Salt Lake County. They offered her a part-time position when it came open in the ombudsman position, or in the ombudsman program. She thought about it. She really considered it, but she decided that she likes being retired and she doesn't want to go back to punching the clock. So she respectfully decided to continue to just be a volunteer, not just be a volunteer, but continue to be a volunteer ombudsman. I've had other volunteers, like the one volunteer that I brought on during COVID and then also lost during COVID. She was a recent undergrad graduate. She was wanting to apply for graduate school. She was hoping to go into physical therapy, and she thought that volunteering with Ombudsman would be a fantastic way to set herself apart from the others who were competing for those limited slots. So she went in. We knew from the beginning I was only going to have her for a year, and I said, great, let's do this thing. And she recently just got accepted, and she moved to New York this month and is going on with her life, but it served her well. I've had other volunteers that have stopped volunteering because they have been hired as staff in long-term care. I had one of my volunteers I lost because he went and became an administrator, and I don't feel bad when I lose volunteers like that, because what an amazing administrator he will be, because he understands resident rights and he has that background as being a volunteer ombudsman. So it will serve him well.
Yes,
Thanks.
we've had that too, Allie-Ann. Thank you. And Carl, that's a great thing. We know they're going to have that advocacy in their system.
Anything else, Carl?
My God, you didn't hear my question, did you?
No.
God.
Okay, so be sure and mute yourself. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so just unmute yourself if you if you have a question or comment. Oh, Stephen.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Leanne and Kelly, for bringing your experience to this new program coordinator. I started about 6 months ago here in San Benito and Santa Cruz counties in California. Just starting to engage a couple of volunteers. They just finished the extensive 36-hour curriculum the state of California is requiring for anyone to be certified, volunteer or otherwise. And they didn't drop off, so that's great news. But I guess a couple of questions. The first one, as a staff ombudsman, and I have a team of 2 others, we have a phone system that we use that, so we don't use our personal cell phones. One thing I found with some previous folks prior to my starting is that they had given their personal numbers to residents and or their family members, which would be a huge boundary cross. How do you help, or what system do you use that would allow your volunteers to remain, I guess, shadowed, if you will, from providing any of their personal information to communicate with residents outside the facility?
Well, I can address that for the volunteers' perspective. Is we have business cards for them that have the 800 line printed on it. And my staff will print their name and then laminate it and give it back to the volunteer. They hand it out to the residents and families so that they know that they can call the 800 line, and that message gets to the volunteer, because we too had people giving out their personal information and then getting calls at all hours of the evening. So we tried to deter it with a business card for the 800 line.
Great.
I have slightly a different thing that I do. Because I'm still a small program and I'm really letting the volunteers guide the direction of this program, I leave it up to the individual volunteers. Some of them are okay with giving out their personal information, so I let them do that, and they're able to text and email and talk directly with the residents, and they set their own boundaries. They feel capable of setting their own boundaries. So if a text comes in at 11 o'clock at night and they don't feel like answering it, they don't. Others who aren't comfortable giving out their personal information, I just saw it in the chat. That's what I do. I use Google Voice. I use that for myself. I don't have a work cell phone. I just have my private one. I let staff have my private cell phone, but I don't let residents or family have it. So I have a Google Voice number, and I help the volunteers set up a Google Voice if they would like that, to be able to kind of mask their personal information and set boundaries there. I think I haven't really dived into Google Voice, but I think there's even a way to set time limits. So it only will put through a text or a call during certain times, which would also help with the boundaries. I've had volunteers set up a dedicated email address that's only for their ombudsman work, to help separate things from their normal email account, and that helps too. But I just let them, because I have such a wide range, I just let them do whatever they feel comfortable with doing.
Great, thank you both for your answers. Appreciate it.
Steve, when it comes to personal cell phones, if you're able to forward your office phone, you can forward that, right? I use that for my volunteers. They call my desk phone, and with us working virtually, I have it forwarded to my personal cell. And then also the volunteers are in contact with the ombudsman for their facilities. So the conversation is between them, usually when it comes down to any issues or concerns. That way there's no third party, and information isn't getting askew in translation from one person.
Great, thank you, William. Appreciate your additional thoughts.
Thanks, Stephen. Dorothy.
That's me. I'm from Region 2 in Ohio, and I'm a long-term care ombudsman volunteer coordinator for 2 months and 2 weeks now. But one of the things that I've come across just in the last few days is, actually, no, it's been ever since I started, when you have volunteers that don't seem to be a good fit but you kind of inherited them when you took on the job. How do you get to the point, or how much time do you give them before you separate them from the organization?
That's a good question.
And that is the reason why that is so important, that when you interview individuals like this for positions like volunteer, you really have to do a good check on the individuals. Because one of the things about volunteer is not that you volunteer, but also the organization that you represent, that be able to give them respect when other volunteers come. So it's very important that when we do this, that we really have to be able to train volunteers to understand their responsibility as a volunteer, not only to the consumer, but also to the program that they are working with.
Absolutely, Carl.
Uh-huh.
And I do understand inheriting volunteers. I think whenever you have a change in leadership, like you taking the reins, it's a time to reset. And I think as much as possible, try to mentor those individual volunteers, find out what their roadblocks are, what their pain points are, and see what are their expectations. It sounds like it's probably maybe a misunderstanding of expectations. And I think discussions, heartfelt discussions, can go a long way. I know my volunteers, they always say, I know you're so busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And I'm like, that's my whole job. You're serving me. I'm happy to do whatever I can to help you. And I think with you taking over the reins, it is a good time to say, okay, I know things have been done slightly different in the past, but we're going to kind of reset now. And these are the new expectations that we're going to start implementing. And then through that discussion, you can figure out if that particular volunteer still feels like, yeah, this is something I want to donate my time to do, or maybe not. And then maybe perhaps you could direct them to another program. I for one, I've been lucky where my performance evaluations have never hung on the number of volunteers that I have or that I recruit. So I've never been hung up on how many volunteers can I have. So I don't hold on to them just for the sake of numbers. If it's not a good fit, they're not going to be a good ombudsman, and they're not going to put forth their best efforts. So I would much rather have them come to me, have a discussion with me, and I can find a better fit for them. I typically ask for a year commitment for my volunteers to offset the amount of training involved. I had one volunteer a couple of years ago come to me, and she had set aside Wednesdays as her ombudsman day. That's when she would work on cases and do visits. And she finally came to me about 6 months into her volunteer time with me, and she's like, I'm starting to dread Wednesdays. I'm getting ulcers because of Wednesdays. But she felt very committed, like she had to finish out her year commitment. She had given me this commitment, and I was just like, okay, let's pull back from ombudsman. I got her connected, so she was starting to do Meals on Wheels delivery, and she still hung out. I told her, I was like, honestly, walk away from ombudsman right now if you want to. She decided that she wanted to finish out the year, but she cut back on her ombudsman responsibilities. She picked up Meals on Wheels delivery, and she was so much happier, and she's still volunteering with Meals on Wheels to this day. So those are some tidbits. Yes, it might come a point where you have to be like, okay, sorry, this is not a good fit. But I think mentoring and trying to find out what those pain points are can go a long way.
That's great advice. I think the hardest thing in the world is to think about having to fire a volunteer. and so if there's a way to just have that conversation that I don't think this is working. Here are other here are other, responsibilities. Or if they are, is there a way to keep them in the program, but not have them be visiting? As long as they've gone through the training, are they someone who could do data entry? Are they someone who likes to write a blog or letters to the editor, or, put up posters? Is there other things that they can do?
Mhm.
They might not be called a volunteer ombudsman, since they wouldn't be doing the work of the program. But if there's a way to keep them as, a assistant or something, that would be good. But I think it's real tough when we start thinking. Any volunteer manager will tell you that one of the hardest things in the world is to say to someone that, this isn't working. Kelly, did you have something?
Yeah, we have that every now and then too. And it's a one-on-one discussion with myself, the volunteer, and sometimes the volunteer coordinator in there, and just kind of ask them what they thought they were supposed to be doing, and then re-guide them to what the actual program does and what their responsibility, their PD, and things like that. We also have them sign, especially for the pandemic, a waiver, and tells them that they agree, and actually an agreement pre-pandemic, to agree to understand and abide by their roles and responsibilities. So we talk about that, and we have it in writing. And then when Carol mentioned other things, sometimes, and Eliane said this too, sometimes a break from it, if there's burnout or whatever's happening. We've had people come in and do office work pre-pandemic, and actually the newsletter could be something helpful, which also reiterates what exactly your program's doing and some of the best practices, so that they can actually see it again and then maybe implement it when they get feeling better.
If I could just jump in here quickly with a comment for Alianne. I think you handle that situation beautifully, because you acknowledged that you understood that this volunteer was struggling and having difficulties, and maybe even had an ulcer. And what you did was you empowered her to be the decision maker, that it was okay to pull back or walk away altogether. And you were fine with that. And that, I think, loosened her up to say, well, I can see this through. I know that my supervisor understands me, and I just think that was great how you handled that.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Thanks, Dorothy. Lorinda. Hello. Ms. Johnson. Maybe I didn't say the name right.
You did say that right. She's my state supervisor.
Okay. Well, if you're speaking, you're still muted.
Might be having some technical difficulties.
Other people, Katie, is there anything on Facebook chat that we need to hear about?
No, it doesn't look like it.
Other questions, other things you want to shout out about that you're doing at your program, that you're, oh, there she's in the chat. Hey there. I see. So Lorinda, you have your hand raised. If you want to say something, feel free to unmute yourself. But if anybody else wants to raise their hand or unmute yourself, ask a question, share something that you're doing with your volunteers. This is our time to just okay, Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda from South Carolina. I wanted to give a shout out. I believe, Carol, you might have to help me, but I believe it was Ohio that did a little twist on their newsletter where it was promoted or mostly written by the volunteers. You had sent that out to us probably maybe it might be a year ago now. But anyway, for the year of 2022, I am also going to put a little twist on my newsletter because of Ohio. I now have some volunteers willing to write articles. And so I'm excited for this next newsletter to go out for January, February. We do a newsletter bi-monthly, but it's going to be mostly written by the volunteers. So I'm excited for that. So thank you, Ohio.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. I hope you'll send me a copy of the newsletter, and maybe we can put it on the NORC website if you will allow that. Maria has typed into the chat that when people were talking about data entry, should the volunteer that does that be certified? Absolutely. In order for them to have access to the confidential information, they need to go through the full training. And even though they won't necessarily be taking in cases, in order to have access to the names of the people who have been making complaints and whatever the resolution is, they need to have gone through the training. So thanks for bringing that up. Mickey, oh, how cold is it?
Oh gosh, it's -7 at my house in Alaska today, but one of our staff said it's -14 at her house. So she won.
All of a sudden the 27 degrees in Utah seems just fine.
I was just curious, since the pandemic, in terms of recruiting new folks, if with patterns, if people have seen a decrease in the amount of people applying to become volunteers with their program now.
I've personally seen an increase. The majority of my current volunteers all came to me during the pandemic last year. I think people are itchy, especially now as more and more facilities open back up. I think people are understanding what these residents went through last year, and they're wanting to help any way they can. So I've actually seen an increase.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of looking at the chat box. So if anybody wants to put their answer in there on what they're seeing, that would be a great place for me to look. I am newer to the program. I started during the pandemic, so I'm gauging where things are at, kind of being in the middle of it all. But thank you.
Yeah. Mickey, we had an increase as well, which I was surprised about. I know we have people that don't want to volunteer because of fear or whatever their reason, but we've had an increase, and we actually added 4 new people in the last couple of months with 2 in-person trainings. I think you're right. People are ready to get back, and they know that they've been isolated. Residents have been isolated for such a long time, so they want to do more and get back. So good luck.
Thank you.
I think one of the issues here is that similar to when there's a new supervisor of volunteers, when there's turnover, that's volunteers sometimes take that opportunity to say, it's a good time for me to, either stop volunteering or move on. And I think 2020, we just saw a ton of people leave. But I think that the requesting, the being vocal, putting information out, you're going to find new people that are going to be willing to do this. And Allie-Ann, I'll tell you that I receive emails from volunteer. Oh shoot, what's the name of it? whatever the website was that you signed up on.
VolunteerMatch.org.
Volunteer Match. Yes, I must have at some point done something, because I get every couple of months I get a list. It says, "Hi Carol, here's local volunteer positions you might be interested in," and I'm always thrilled when I see that the Missouri Ombudsman Program is listed as one of the things that I could sign up to be a volunteer with. So the nice thing there is that they promote different job opportunities. Kelly, Lorinda put her question in chat. Have you calculated retention with your program to capture turnover?
And can you all hear me? I think I figured out my audio issue.
Yes. There you are. Yes.
Hey,
Lorinda.
awesome. So I wanted to start out by just saying thank you to the Consumer Voice for putting this together. It's really helpful, and I hope we get more opportunities to connect as volunteer coordinators in the future. I love this. So I am the state level volunteer coordinator for the Ohio Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. And just today we had a group meeting with all of our volunteer coordinators, and they requested that we talk about retention. So I wanted to know, how do you calculate retention? What are some retention strategies that you employ? And have you experienced increased turnover during the pandemic? Because that's something we kind of come to realize in Ohio.
Well, we lost a handful of people this year. We kept everybody last year because of the relationships that had been built and maintained from the program. Myself, I know every volunteer personally. My staff know them very well personally. We spend time with them. We have volunteers who stayed because we don't have that much turnover in our staff, but also because they truly believe in what they're doing. They have relationships at that facility. They call them their residents. And that was the first thing when we said we can't go in right now, which we thought would be a couple months in 2020. Little did we know. And that's the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I miss my residents, when can I get back? So that's the big deal. We also retain because we involve them in other things like the post-intensive training, the initial trainings. We gather them in small groups. They like to be together, just like this morning when I said we had Governor Schreiber on. They get a chance to see each other and wave and talk, and they really like each other. They miss each other too. We don't always get to be all 100 people in the same room because Wisconsin's not that big, but it's bigger than you think. And there's a lot of travel in there. So we have regional meetings all the time. Each of my staff conduct regional meetings and keep people together and connected.
And I have a question.
I don't know if that answered it or not.
So thank you, Kelly. And Shauna, I'm going to get to you. Carl, I'm going to get to you, but I want to finish up with the resources. And if people aren't in a hurry to leave and go do something else, we can keep this chat going for a few more minutes. But I just want to mention, if you are not a member of the listserv, it's just a matter of emailing me, cscott@theconsumervoice.org. Be sure and have information in there that tells me that you actually do manage the volunteers. This is not for volunteers themselves or other staff, but it's whoever it is that's doing the recruiting and training and monitoring and everything. This is a listserv that it's done by email, and people ask each other questions and share resources. On the NORC website, under support at the top, you can scroll down for volunteer management. We have all kinds of training. There's information on each of these different topics. I could click on them and open them up. There are previous conference calls and webinars, and there's also volunteer opportunities. If you want to use NORC as a place to recruit volunteers, you are able to write out your little ad and put it in there. There is a full toolkit if you are looking at the beginning of your of starting a program, or you're kind of just resetting it. The toolkit includes everything from a welcoming letter to background forms that can be filled out to what are the expectations, what's the job description. There's like 10 different parts of this toolkit. You are welcome to beg, borrow, steal, share, whatever, any of that intake toolkit. The recruitment steps, I found this to be very interesting and helpful. This is from Oklahoma. And this is really just saying, if you're going to do recruitment, you need to put a plan together. You need to have a calendar that says, you know, this is the week we're going to reach out to churches, or this is the week we're going to put posters up in grocery stores, or, you know, and these are, I thought, was a very good list of things to do to set up an actual recruitment effort. And this is from Hawaii. Just another example of a recruitment brochure that that they have put together. It has a lot of really good information, all on that one page. And the last slide of this slide deck, or second to last, is our information on how to contact us. We've been putting all this information into the chat, and Katie has put in the evaluation. It would be very, very helpful if you guys would click on that link and give us your input. We appreciate that. And just a reminder that NORC does have an app that you can put in on your phone that would, it has access to all kinds of documents, resident rights, the rule, ombudsman rule. Just, you know, if you're in a facility and you need to show somebody something, you can open up the app, open up, you know, the Ombudsman Resource Center website and have direct access to something. You can just say, hey, here, this is the document I'm talking about, or whatever. So encourage you to download that app. So with that, Shauna and then Carl.
Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to share how we were able to retain volunteers through the pandemic. And then I have an ask for everybody. So a couple of things, and I'm from Central Washington, Washington State. Our state's broken into regions. We have a huge geographical region, 6 counties. What we did was we engaged with our volunteers. So I supervise the volunteers, and I would contact them, talk to them, keep them engaged. And we found that previously we would have our volunteer meetings would be bi-monthly because we'd have to drive so far to get together. And so we were then changing it to monthly. So actually COVID helped us to connect in a better way because we were able to Zoom and dialogue better and stay connected. And I felt like it was actually a real bonding time. We did lose some folks just due to a lot of our volunteers in our area are retired, and some folks had to go take care of their own loved ones who were aging, or they themselves were aging out. So we didn't lose anybody out of fear. We just lost people out of their own personal need to do something different. So my ask for everybody is, well, let me take a step back. So what we've done is we've tried to do radio ads. I've been interviewed. We're actually having a TV segment coming up. We're having a hard time finding people to volunteer. And I'm looking for a demographic because we're finding that the folks who work full-time and have families can't really commit. And folks who are on the older side of a volunteer are then taking care of their own parents. So if anybody has ideas on how to reach kind of that mid-range demographic, I'd love to hear it.
Whoops, sorry.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I can tell you that our volunteers are actually our best recruiters. They value what they do so much that they're constantly telling people all about it. So that might be something, if your volunteers know someone or they just speak out, that's a good resource for sure. And, you know, we actually have a lot more men in our program than most programs, which is amazing. And I don't really know how we got them, except for the fact that we have photo posters in facilities with a picture of our volunteer and their name. And they'll say, I saw this opportunity visiting someone and I'd like to know more information.
Shauna, I target students, not so much since COVID, but in years past, I've made connections with our local university. I was, for their gerontology master's program, I was a practicum site that students could pick to do their practicum with. And I have plans of connecting. I want to connect with undergrads. I want to get them when they're freshmen or sophomore, because then they're students longer. And it's a great way to set themselves apart, like this student volunteer I was telling you about earlier. It's a good way to set them apart, and they seem to have more time on their hands. They're a little bit more flexible. That's something else too with my program. My volunteers can visit facilities on the weekends, in the evenings. I've had students sitting on campus in between classes making phone calls. So it really can be flexible, which again, they love a lot more than saying, okay, come volunteer, but you have to do it every Saturday from 8 to 12. So yeah, I would maybe look at a different population or demographic than the typical one, maybe.
Thanks. Good question. Good responses. Carl.
Yeah, my question is, I know that is a lot of volunteers have to do a lot of traveling. Do they get reimbursed for any traveling that they do?
Our volunteers get reimbursed for coming to, when we did it in person, for coming to the 3 in-services and for helping with the new class and the post-intensive. And if we do have an in-person class, the seasoned volunteer gets mileage to that class, not a new volunteer, and then they get it for the post-intensive.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
And my volunteers are able, through the Ombudsman program, to get reimbursement going to and from facilities. Most of them don't take advantage of it though, which I find interesting. Several of mine are connected with the RSVP program, and they get some mileage reimbursement to and from their house to the first facility, but not if they visit multiple facilities that same day. RSVP doesn't cover those additional visits. So they're able to get a combination, but I'm finding that most don't want it, or they're happy with just the little bit that RSVP gets them. So, but the option is there.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, I think that across the country, it really varies on whether or not programs provide that reimbursement, and it really is all about, you know, kind of what's their budget. But I know that we asked this question fairly recently across the country, and I think, you know, most people did say, Allie-Ann, just like what you're saying, is that the volunteers are grateful that they're offered it, but they're not, they recognize that the money is, you know, not necessarily there, and so they don't wish to take it. But for the ones that need it, I mean, if that's the thing that would get them into the program, especially in some of you that have volunteers that might have to drive quite a ways or pay for parking in the big cities, that can be a deterrent.
Yes. Thanks.
Hey, you're welcome. I don't see any other hands raised. We're about 10 minutes over. I can't thank Allie-Ann and Kelly enough for sharing their excitement and energy about volunteers. Both of them have said, bring it on. So absolutely feel free to to reach out to them. And also feel free to reach out to myself or Amity or Katie if you are looking for something on our website and are not finding it. With that, thank you all. Everybody have a blessed holiday season coming up. And I hope that in the new year that the volunteers are running you over and that your complaint is that you don't have enough time to get them all out and doing their job because they're just falling all over you. So with that, thank you very much. Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.